Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Go Beyond. My name is Alyssa Robinson, and I am the digital strategist here at Treach. And once again, I am here with our senior pastor, Reverend Daniel Humbert. And I have mixed feelings about this fall weather right now.
I love it. I think it's great.
So I hope that y'all are enjoying this cold day. I got to pull out my leather jacket, which is
Right.
nice. But today on Go Beyond, we are going to dig into our Huddle discussion and Huddle guide. And I've included a link to the Huddle guide in the description of this video. So I hope you'll pull it up and go along with us. But Go Beyond is a time where we can dig deeper into the message from Sunday. And so, as a part of that, every Monday we go into that Huddle discussion together, and Daniel and I take a stab at answering the questions that we have posed to you that we want to encourage you to answer at home with your kids, with your family, to have a deeper understanding of the message. So, I'll go ahead and start off with our first question today. Which is referring to the feeding of the 5,000 that Daniel talked about in his message yesterday. And the question is, why did the boy offer up his lunch for the group?
Oh, you want me to answer that?
Yeah, you answer it. You go first. You went to seminary.
Well, so of course, first of all, again, the Gospel of John's the only one that has the account of the boy, which is my favorite part of the story. And of course, then the other thing is, all we can do is conjecture, right? That's all we can do. And so I kind of make up that the boy literally probably had no idea what was about to happen, and that he probably was just doing what any good kid would do, which is, hey, somebody's asking for something. I want to try to be helpful. And by golly, if I've got a little bit here, I might could share. I think I'll just share it. And um, so, do I have a clue? I don't really have a clue, but I'm hoping that he shared it as a way to just say, hey, I want to kind of make something good happen. And sure enough, he did. But I don't think he had any clue what was about to take shape.
Yeah, man, I would love to say that I would be that little kid that would offer up my lunch, but I have a feeling, and I don't know if this is the case, mom might have been sitting next to him, giving a little nudge.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. But I think it is interesting the way that you connected the boy offering up his food to our call for generosity, because I feel like the way that I've always been taught the story of the feeding of the 5,000 is the emphasis on this is one of Jesus's miracles. And so it's always pointed to the fact that, Jesus is God. Here's an example. And we have this whole, trail of miracles that we're going through. And there's a few ways that this is brought up to me in a different ways of like never thinking about the lesson being in the child, not the lesson pointing to the fact that Jesus is God.
Yeah, yeah, and that's why I love this particular rendering. It is in all four gospels, but this one is so unique simply because of that boy. And for me, the good news is there's nothing extraordinary about this kid. He's just an every ordinary kid, and they asked for his lunch or whatever you want to call that food that he had, and he just gave it. And he's the one who made the difference. I mean, clearly, Jesus, did a miracle and fed 5,000 people, and that's pretty big stuff. But it's really the boy making the offering that makes the difference, I think. So,
Do we know why at all this account is different? Because I didn't know that this is the only gospel that the boy is mentioned in the feeding of the 5,000.
yeah, well, do we know why? Literally, no, other than John is a master storyteller, and he's writing much later than the other gospels, probably somewhere between 20 and 30 years later than the other three gospels. And so he's had what I just call it, the capacity to think and reflect more on how to tell this same story. The beauty of the four gospels is there are four different authors telling the same story in their own way. And so John kind of tells this story as he understood it, and he adds this great dimension that, to me, um, what's the word I'm trying to call it? He makes it more human, and he makes it more real, in my opinion, by helping add the dimension of the boy.
So, our second question in today's huddle discussion is, how have you witnessed Jesus multiplying things in your life?
Yeah, well, so as I reflected on that, I tend to reflect more on how I see Jesus doing stuff, not just in my life, but in sort of my life in relation to other people. And so I think of things like what I mentioned in the message, which was, man, when we're able to give whatever we can, whether it's $5,000 or $5,000, 10 or $10,000, that Jesus literally multiplies it. And we saw that in things like building water wells in Ethiopia, or setting people free in human trafficking, or building homes for other people, because to me that's what happens. And it's one thing to raise money, as we did, but it's quite another then when we build those water wells, or when we literally set people free, how it just sort of magnifies what it is Jesus can do. In terms of my own life, I would just say, um, uh, Kay and I tithe, as we've talked about. We actually, over the last many years, are above the tithe now. And the way I look at it is, and we've done this now at about, well, at least two churches, but I think three churches, that approximately every 5 to 6 years, we actually give my entire salary. And so I've done that here at Treach. And so my entire salary for a 1 year period has been given to this church. And so I'm literally sort of working free every sixth year. And we can do it, and God provides, and God makes that opportunity. And I just look at that as a powerful example of how we can actually tithe, and how it can add up over time and really makes a big difference. And I think it makes a huge difference for ministry as well.
I struggled with this question because I think that this might be a cop out. There are little things for me that I see, but honestly, at 32 years old, I think I need a little bit more life experience and wisdom. I think that seeing how God has multiplied blessings and things in your life is something that requires hindsight.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I've lived enough life to be able to see all the ways that God has been multiplying, except, I'm so grateful for, my family and the support that I have from the church. And there are things that I see individually, but maybe 20 years from now or 10 years from now, I can look back and actually see tangible ways that my blessings have been multiplied.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And I think the question clearly is personal. Where have you seen it in your life? But I also believe it's not literally just where has it happened in my life, but where have I just witnessed that? Where have I seen God sort of multiplying things, or making things happen that might not otherwise happen? And I think it's always good to consider that, because in turn, I believe that leads to gratitude, right? Because I can see that this is actually sort of happening. I may not always understand it. I mean, I remember you said a couple of weeks ago, I think it was 2 weeks ago, I can't remember, but you made mention of sort of things falling into place that hadn't otherwise, you wouldn't have expected, like that refund check that came back from a deposit. And that's a form of multiplying, right? I mean, it was money you hadn't been counting on, if you will, and then sort of it appears, if you will, out of nowhere. I think that, but you're right, that's always sort of hindsight.
Yeah. And I will say, just as far as the way I'm able to serve in the church, I've seen multiplied through my knowledge of digital strategy, because I majored in mass communication with an emphasis on journalism. And I took one class my last semester of my senior year that was just an easy A class that was about digital media. And then that just set me on fire. And I got a job at a marketing agency, and I worked there for 5 years. And I just got accumulated all of this knowledge as quickly as possible, just learning on the job. And then I'm able to take that and turn it into ministry. Is pretty cool. And I think that that's a good example of God multiplying, that one class that I took that kind of set me on fire and activated my passion. God is taking it and saying, hey, I can use this.
I agree wholeheartedly. And our church, and in turn the community, I believe, has been blessed by your ministry. Absolutely. Good stuff.
So, our last question in today's huddle discussion, what is the relationship between trust and abundance? I hate when we talk about trust, by the way. We
I
bring
get
it up far too
yeah,
often in the
yeah,
church.
yeah, yeah. It's that faith thing, right?
Mhm.
And so I don't know that I have a great answer to this. I was, of course, sharing with you just before we started. That's a tough question, right? It's a hard question, and I wanted us to grapple with it. And I'll just own right off the top, I don't believe there's a direct correlation at all between trust and abundance. But I do think there's some correlation, and all I mean by that is, I think the more I can trust God, the more I become grateful for what it is God is doing in my life, because I trust that God's doing it, or that somehow God's providing for it, or whatever. And that in turn creates what I would just call an attitude of abundance. And so while my either my income or my I don't know, my wealth, or however you want to describe that, I don't know that literally becomes bigger. That's not what I mean by abundance, but I do think my perception of the world and my understanding of how God's interfacing in the world, that becomes more abundant, I believe, simply because I now know I can trust God just a little more, because each time I trust God and God sort of follows through, whatever that is, then the world gets a little better, simply because I know God can do that. So that's how I look at that question.
Well, I was thinking the same thing as, the relationship between trust and abundance is that when we trust, it redefines abundance. Of, culturally, what we mean by abundance is wealth, material possessions, being able to live freely and do whatever you want, not have to worry about paying the bills. We would see that as living abundantly. Uh, but when we take the focus away from ourselves and stop putting our trust in ourselves, because I think that that's where that idea of abundance comes from, is the idea of, like, if I work hard enough, if I trust in my privilege, my finances, my education, all of these things that I've acquired, then I will be able to live in abundance. And that means that we are trusting in ourselves and not in a higher power. And
Yeah,
so if we're able to transition our trust from ourselves to a higher power, I think that what we'll find is abundance takes on a whole new meaning that's more fulfilling than anything that we could have accomplished if we trust in ourselves.
absolutely. And it's interesting, and this thought literally just came to my head. It's the Old Testament or Hebrew Scriptures concept of prosperity. Um, Typically, when we read that word or that concept in the Hebrew Scriptures, we tend to think that what it means is that the person is going to get wealthier. But really, in the Hebrew Scriptures, what that means is, and I forget the exact phraseology, but when you trust God, you're going to prosper, is the general concept. That prosperity is not about wealth at all. It's about a richer heart and a richer relationship with God, and a sense that your life is going to get better, or be more full, if you will. And so it's just interesting, because some people, when they read that, they think, well, that means I'm going to get rich. If I follow God, then I'll get rich. But it's not that way at all. The prosper there is much like the way we've been talking about abundance, which is really kind of cool.
So I really want to, those are all the questions that we have today, but I'd really like to encourage people. This entire worship series for the past month has been focused on getting on the path to generosity, and we've been calling it a path worth taking. And so what I'd really like to encourage y'all to do is to visit tmumc.org/path to consider putting in your estimate of giving. How can you live more generously through 2021 in the life of this church? And there are all sorts of resources to help you out. And it's not about, we saw this great testimony from Chris and Nikki Sears on Sunday. They talking about it. The goal is not necessarily to immediately get to the point of tithe. It's just to grow one step at a time. And we have some great resources for you to help you grow in your generosity, because we know that it can feel overwhelming if the goal feels too high. And of course, we know that end goal is to eventually get to tithing, or beyond tithing, as Daniel has brought up with his personal practice of generosity. But I really want y'all to go to tmumc.org/path and explore and watch the stories and see the resources, because this is something that we really believe in as a church and we love talking about.
Indeed. Great stories there. Great stories.
Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you again on Wednesday at 12:30 for another episode of Go Beyond.